Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest has been building companies for the last 2 decades. A technologist at his core that has transformed into a great operator. He's a veteran in the Boston startup community. Before founding his own company, he served as VP of engineering at Endeca, which was acquired by Oracle in 2011 for over $1 billion. His current company is the leading engineering management platform. They enable engineering, finance, and business leaders to align engineering output with strategic business objectives. They have more than 600 customers. And they were recently named one of Forbes' next billion-dollar startups. Co-founder and CEO of Jellyfish, Andrew Lau. Hey, Andrew.
David, thanks for having me here, man. This is going to be super fun. I'm excited.
I'm very excited. I'm happy Gail put us in touch, and I'm excited to do this. So let's jump into it. First question: what's the one thing that you've done at Jellyfish, big or small, that's had the biggest impact, and that you'll absolutely do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
There's a lot of things we've done. I don't know how many of them are the right ones, but the one thing I think I would recommend to future self and to other folks is that 3 co-founders, me, Dave, and Phil, and just a little context. I've known these guys for 25 years. They hired me in 1999 when I was still in college, and I learned the startup game from these guys. It was an 8-person startup. It was in a basement somewhere. These guys taught me how to sell. They taught me how to be a professional. They taught me how to ride the wave and feel a startup happening. They taught me what it tastes like to have a company that's winning and tastes like a good culture. And so when we got back together, I think this is what experience taught us. So, we're in our late 30s, early 40s, and we sat down and actually said, we wrote down, what do we want out of this experience, right? And so we did some alignment work with the 3 of us. We sat in a sushi bar down here in Boston. I think they had a happy hour back then. And so gotten some discount sushi, a couple beers, and we wrote on a napkin, or a proverbial napkin. It was like a Mac Notes thing. I can probably still find it. And we just wrote down, what do we want from this thing? Like, what is this idealized company experience going to be like? And I think that's really important because I think as we get older and through our careers, you have a high opportunity cost. And I think it's really important to get alignment with co-founders, alignment with yourself, that you can kind of remind yourself over time, this is your North Star. And so, and I think because we've known each other for a long time, it gave us shorthand vocabulary to talk about this stuff. And so I remember we actually wrote down stuff in kind of 2 columns. And half of it was around people, right? So I'll give you some examples. It was just because we had gone through an experience together, we could have shorthands around the people, more like this and less like that. And everybody says no jerks, no assholes. Like, that's easy. We could even probably say not like that person, right? But more of these folks and a more vibe like this. And do you remember that time? And so we could have shorthanding, but you could make it without shorthand. But we were banging out that side. And the other half of the thing, so this is about people and the culture and the vibe. And then the other side was about what kind of business. And this was even before the Jellyfish concept. So it's very meta, right? But we wrote down stuff like B2B, innovation-oriented, new markets not old, technology-centric, product-centric. And I remember a notable one here, which was we wrote down, we wanted to touch a lot of people. I know that's a weird vocabulary, but the point being is that we wanted something that actually could get to scale, have reach, have big TAM and VC speak. And I think that's an example of an alignment thing where we kind of needed to say for each other, why are we in this one? And that is a shorthand for us to say hey, we wanted to, we're not playing a small ball this one. It's going to be harder. It's going to be further. It's going to have higher risk. Probably not going to get there. But we want to swing harder this time, and we want to make it bigger. And we're willing to do that together and put our hand on a table together for that part of it. And so that was an example of, I think that does dictate, the business we chose. It does dictate what kind of investment you want to choose. It does dictate how hard you're going to grind and the swing you're going to take. And I think, and I know we did it in shorthand, but I think it's really important. It doesn't mean you're going to nail it. It doesn't mean that contract will hold perfectly. It doesn't mean you're going to nail every nook and cranny of alignment. But I think if you can, it sets a North Star and table stakes to start talking about that stuff over time.
And was that one meal, that dinner, that sushi dinner, everything came out of that one meal?
It did, and yeah, like I can probably dig up the Mac Notes document because it hides it keeps the history of this stuff. It did, but it wasn't like you're asking me like it was dramatic. I don't think it was dramatic because we have known each other for a long time, and so it was probably already in our heads. It was just the ritual of writing it down together and just nodding to it. And be clear, this isn't even about the concept of jellyfish, which seems a little wonky, but this was like very meta around like what do we want out of this experience together, right? And so like I think at the time it was not a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal because we were aligned on it, but I do think it's a notable step to go through the ritual of writing it down because that's how you're cementing it together on that stuff, you know?
And how did you choose? Did you know what role everyone was going to play when you had that discussion, or was it we're going to co-found a company together and we'll figure out roles later?
No, I think like look, roles are hard with founders. I think that's important. You got to sort that stuff out. It's not always perfect, and things change over time. I do think that like we have the benefit of like we all came up through product and engineering. So in some ways, we're all pretty multimodal. We've seen similar experiences, and then afterwards, we did other things together too. And so we have common ground from the time we spent together, but then we actually picked up different experiences we kind of scaled out. And so that synthesis of the two kind of put us in various things. And like, look, some of us are more extroverted than others. Some of us are deeper in tech. Some of us are, based in different geographies at the time. And so like those kind of did sort out some practicalities out of that stuff. Um, but I think like we're unique in the sense that we all have different skills, but we have common ground that we're kind of overlapping Venn diagrams. So we can tag in, tag out for each other, which I think is good, but we're not the same. So like it's balance across that.
Of those things with the whole company? Like, is that document, those things, has that been shared with the company, or has that come through in the values? Like, how does the company know?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, we tell the story. It's not like this. I literally have not dug up the doc, but I can. That's a good point. Maybe I should dig it up. But it's messy and like it's not that it's handwriting messy. It's messy in shorthand. But like it exists, and we've talked about it. And some of the stuff really, I think, carries on. Like I actually, so one of the people things, for example, and we actually do talk about this, is we said we have to make it work. And what I meant by that, and so this is our shorthand. So when we started the company, at least two of us had very young kids, right? Like I think I had a relatively newborn and a 2-year-old or something like that, right? No, that's just not right. It was probably a 2-year-old or like a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, or a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So like they were young kids, and I think Dave had young kids too, a little bit older, but like still generally young. And we actually said in the people column part of it, we talk about this in the office all the time, is like we got to make this work. And what that means is making it work says that like experience has taught us this is a long journey. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we also live lives as humans here too. And so we have to make this thing work for us. And that meant that it has to work with our families, our lives, and all these things. And it doesn't mean that we are not going to make a successful company. We have to make those things intersect. Acknowledge that. And so this means like, look, earlier in my career, it was all about like you're here till 11 at night and eating ramen and then going out to the bars afterwards and like I'm in my late 40s now. I can't do that. I fall asleep. But also like it's a no, but there's a reality. You're like a 2-year-old. Like your partner's gonna kill you. Like it doesn't make sense. It's not fair, right? And so we said we have to make it work. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we had to choose a business line that will work for our team and where we actually are. A recognition. Like we have to be successful. That means putting in time. And so, for example, like I had to go home at like 5 or 6 to go make dinner. Okay, that doesn't mean that I actually like wouldn't be back at like back online at 8, grinding and working on stuff. But that means that you had to acknowledge it. That means you had to build a team that didn't need you hovering above them to make sure they were working and stuff like that. I've been in previous companies before where like the whole staff is built to make sure that everybody doesn't leave work early and go drinking too early, right? Like, and like, that's a certain company that was built in a certain way. But I was like, we can't do that because I can't do that, right? Like, I'm not gonna, and so that means that we had to build a team. We had to have a team that's a bit more personally mature, and that might actually cost more. And so this means that actually the business has to be able to sustain and make work for that part of it. So you can't, your business has to support a higher margin or something. I'm just saying it has to work, right? We have to build a successful business, and we have to make it work for our life stage. And so that recognition was important for us because we didn't want a situation where we're lying to ourselves of what we can't do and cause the business to fail in that. Nor should we sign ourselves for economics that don't make sense for the company either, right? Because that'll lead to failure, right? And so, like, yeah, there was a shorthand we call the kind of startup for grownups was a little internal shorthand. We said it's silly, but like that's what we meant by that part of it. And so, like, yeah, the team has seen inklings of this stuff. I mean, you should survey Gail. I don't know, like ask her, like, does she perceive some of these things here? And I think they exist in the way that we do things, but I think where it manifests most is in the margin decisions, the North Star of how you make decisions, of the people you want to hire, the swing you want to make, the investments you want to take on, the product swings you want to make, like all that stuff. I think that's where it appears most because it sets the tone of that North Star. Make sense?
It's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. And when we've talked about this, and Gail has shared this with me about the company, like for me, this is one of my challenges of I have not yet experienced building a company in this mode. My entire career has been exactly the mode that you talked about, grinding all day and all night and everything. And it's actually one of the things I think about going forward. I think about how is the next company going to be different because I didn't have kids when I started Better Cloud, you know.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't want to claim that we aren't grinding. We're freaking grinding.
No, no, of
But it's
course,
just
of
like,
course, of
but
course.
the modality is different, right?
And I feel like it's also like in COVID, I feel like also changed a little bit. Like you did this before COVID, but then COVID really, I feel, was when a lot of this was introduced, kind of to the way of working that people I mean, companies had to adapt at that point in time to trust their employees more. To you know,
and I think it goes both ways. You have to build that contract implicitly with yourself and your team and your co-founders and peers, where you don't need to hover over them to do a thing. I'm not saying that people don't need to deliver; they need to deliver, right? But that there is capability and trust and self moderation that can do this without hounding. But some stuff you gotta be sitting there cramming together, and so I'm not saying it's perfect, right? But I'm just saying don't lie to yourself. That's my biggest thing too. Like you got young kids. Don't sign yourself up for something that's going to make you sacrifice the business or sacrifice your family. That's not fair to either party, right? So own that is like, and I'm saying that's the physics you have to recognize.
so you started your career. You mentioned all of you started your career product engineering, um, and you're now CEO. You've built this business, very successful business. How have you evolved into a CEO? You know, because it's definitely different to be a engineering leader, even if the team was 10,000 people. Very different to be an engineering leader than be the CEO of a startup. Is that like, did you have these skills, do you feel innately in you, or did they evolve over time? How did you start enjoying, I'm sure you have to do sales now, you have to do, like fundraising, all this stuff that you didn't have to do. Talk to me about that evolution or that journey.
So you're going to see some discomfort in me, and maybe I'm wincing or shrinking in my seat here. I think that's some of the imposter syndrome stuff. I don't know. Like, am I, I definitely don't declare success yet. And I definitely am cautious of actually saying we're good at any of these things. But I can talk about the journey, right? Like, I can talk about the journey around knowing yourself on this stuff. So I'll say a little bit around how the role has changed And I will say also about my personal evolution into that part of it. So on the personal side of it, I actually think, look, I'm Asian guy, trained an engineer. Like those values should teach you to like put your head down and go code perfectly, and then the world will reward you, right? Like I don't think that's actually how the world works these days. Like I think it's and like counter to my parents' generation on that stuff. That's not like I don't think how the game works these days. And so look, I actually think it was really important when I started working with Dave and Phil in the late '90s, where I kind of learned the art of sales engineering. They taught me to clean myself up, put a shirt on, like go to a sales call. Like this is and like also it's not just how you show up, but how you listen to a customer, how you get the taste of this thing. Like how do you listen to a customer and realize, oh, I could solve that and solve it to them and watch them delight and value when you deliver to them. And you learn that rhythm and taste, and you're like, oh, that didn't work that time, or that did work that time. They're like, oh, okay. So I think there is something about learning the taste of not just selling, is selling and product and satisfying them. And I use the word taste in the sense that it's like you might sit through those, but you didn't hear it right, so like you didn't get it right. So like it's like there is something around once you have that taste bud activation, you can seek it again. So I think that for me, that was actually step one of that part of it. And then it's kind of as I was growing through my career in those things and kind of moving through different kinds of executive roles and stuff like that, I think I started getting some sense of how I, enjoy like some things that didn't fit my, stereotypical view, engineer, introvert in the corner kind of thing, right? Like that I actually enjoyed the dialogue and kind of making things happen with customers, prospects, and those things. I would say actually though, like as far as the company goes, look, the first few years, I think we're just one team doing a thing. Like we're all doing the same thing. We're finding customers, trying to find that, I hate the term, but the product market fit thing. You're just trying to find customers and you're a small crew. Everyone's just doing stuff to actually make it happen. And so I actually think we're all just kind of in it together doing that. I mean, yeah, we might do different things, but it didn't feel that different to me. Like it's just, you're startup-ing, right? And yeah, I've always been a person because I grew up in engineering management. I did a lot of hiring, so yeah, I'm hiring, but like that's again, you're just startup-ing in this whole world. I think it started feeling different to me when the company got the kind of 2021 activation go time and all that stuff started happening, right? Like 2020, 2021, that kind of shift where like fundraising pacing started changing, all of that stuff, and like yeah, like I think so that was step one in realization that like, yeah, fundraising's a thing and it is important. And I started realizing and building partners and getting out there that I actually like, so I don't know if it was innate there or I've adapted to it, but I find enjoyment. And like on an average bear, I'm a little more, I'm not a big time extrovert, but I could be out there and actually working with folks, and I enjoy the energy of doing that. I get tired like people too, but I enjoy the energy of actually meeting more folks. And I do think when it comes to startups, like I think people think fundraising is this transactional thing. It's not. I mean, sure, in 21 might have been, but in general, it's about building trust. It's about meeting people. It's about raising odds. You got to be in the game. You got to be out there. And so I actually think a lot of folks think they're like, oh, I read a spreadsheet. I mean, I read a presentation. I make a magic deck and I just send it around and all things happen. It's like, I don't think it works that way. Or maybe people that are better than I am make it works that way. It's about meeting people over, months, quarters, years, multiple times. You build trust with them. They understand what you're doing. They start to build like, hey, these guys say they're doing this and they're actually going to go do this thing. I'll back with these guys. I'll roll with these guys. And then when the transaction time comes, it's easy for them to say yes because, the math is, like the activator, but it's like they've already built that trust along the way. And so I realize like that's part of the job. You have to be out there. You have to be meeting with customers, partners, prospects, investors, and that is a runtime game. And whether I naturally was built for that, ever learned it, or realized like I'm not terrible about it, and I'm not terrible at it, and I don't hate it. Like I derive energy from meeting folks, and so on balance, like that's part of the role, right? And so that was kind of unlock one for me on the journey around realizing. And I think like look, when you're 10-person company, once you raise that first bullet of money. Like that's not the job. You're making the product. You got to make the thing actually happen. But there is a time here, for us where like, we're 100 people and suddenly the game shifted and it's much more around that. And so about that trust building exercise and telling the story that is part of the job. And so like that's adaptation one. And then adaptation two is like stuff that I've been learning the last couple of years is how much like my role is shifting, which is starting to talk more about realizing what's going to actually happen in the next 2 to 3 years further out. And like, I know, like I used to sit there back in the day and be like, okay, like vision, mission, this is cheesy stuff. Like, I don't know, like how does that change things? And I've actually started realizing, look, maybe it's the maturity of the business, maybe because we've got a great leadership team, but like to a certain degree, like I got to help them on the quarter, but like a lot of the dies are already cast and it's in their hands on this stuff. And I can go try to help on a deal, help on a customer, help on a product, but that's delivered now. And I can't do it all, or it doesn't make sense. And like, A, they're probably better at it than I am. And B, like I can't do it all today. But like my biggest leverage contribution is probably to start thinking about what's going to hit us in the third horizon, a few years out, and start telling that story, folks. Which doesn't mean you got to stop what you're doing today. You got to do that, and you got to prep for next year, and you got to be looking out a few years from now. And I've realized that my contribution now and my role is to help paint the story a few years out now, so we can actually nudge our way in to figure out how we're to drive investment to those areas. Because that's as important. I'm not saying that's a whole job. I'm just saying that's an addition that I'm learning along the way here too. And for me, like I got more activated in that in the last couple of years because I'm starting to see the reasons and manifestations why. Because if we don't as founders, folks don't realize we need to go over there. And it's not because they're blinders up or it's not because they're got it wrong. It's just like they don't know. And so that's part of the role as we kind of grow up and get bigger on that stuff. And like, and then like, look, let's be frank, this last few years have been so tumultuous as a company, I'm for the, not just company, the industry, all of us, right? Like, and I think then there's a new thing that's actually happening, which like as a founder, you gotta jump between the different, some days it's all on tactics, guys, because we got a crisis here, we got to solve. And then it's like, oh, no, guys, you got to like, okay, we got to make sure we pay attention 3 years from now. It's like, oh no, it's tactic time. And so you're like, kind of like, you're the instinct of when you got to go like this or that on that stuff. And I think that's been a very complicated part of the last few years because the macro is so dynamic. You can't just stick to one end of that.
What's interesting when you talk about all of that and you talk about the evolution, I think that especially that last part about looking at to the third horizon, that was one of my personal biggest challenges of I was always so operationally like in the weeds of like this quarter and all. And I had an investor, Enrique Salem from Bain Ventures. And when I was talking to him, I would talk to him every 2 weeks. And I started showing up to these meetings telling him like, oh, next week we're going to do this. Next month we're doing this. He said, Dave, you're at a point now. I don't really care right now what you're going to do this week or next week. And you said it the best way. It's already done. You're not really going to impact that. Let your team go own that. What are you doing next quarter? What are we doing next year? Where's the market going? How do we prepare for that? Who do we have to start hiring, recruiting now for? And it was such a unlock for me of like, wow, if I do, and I realized that I kept coming up against these situations that I hadn't looked far enough ahead to know we're coming. And then it would hit me in the face. And I was like, oh my God. So that when you said that, like that for me resonates so much and it's hard because to get to that place where you need to be looking out that far, the only way to get there is by being operationally in the weeds on so it's just kind of.
So you need both, right? Because you miss the quarter, you don't get the chance to go to the next year.
Exactly.
And if you don't get your next year right, you don't get the chance to see 3 years from now. So like you got to flow through. And I actually think there's one last thing here too. Because I have friends, we talk about this. And so sometimes if you're like overly indexed on this quarter, it might be that you've got your own leadership challenges on this stuff, right? If you've got to actually still be playing that seat, like that's a thing that like, oh, are we missing something on our team that you got to be, or is it a bad habit of yours that you're just in it because you can't build trust? Okay, that dunno. Or there's a third variation that's actually in this tumultuous time you got to watch for. Did something structurally change that, like, you've got as a founder, you've got to reweigh it in? Did something like, and because there have been so macro shifts around this stuff, is it a process leadership failure that makes you dig in? Is your own inclinations that you got to get yourself out of there? Or is there like something actually changing that is like very macro, very dynamic that your current team can't intuit because they don't see it on that thing? So that's a third variation that suddenly has to have you back laser in on right now. And that's what I mean by this. These last few years have been so weird around which one you're playing on, you know?
What let's go to the early days for a second. How did you, I told you this before we started. I've gotten a bunch of text messages recently from founders, early stage founders listening to the podcast, and they said, "Can you add a question to the podcast, which is how did the person find their first 5 customers?" So I'm going to ask you, first guess that I'm asking the question to. So how did you find your first 5 customers?
I'll actually go to 20 because it's more important.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, no. I actually think it's really important. And I don't know if it's the only way. I'll just say it our way of this stuff. Okay, so like I said earlier, we all professionally grew up in the late 90s, and back in that generation, there was a different playbook that startups ran. A lot of companies did stuff in terms of pro services back days that people don't really do so much today. And if you go to the late 90s, a lot of companies were built on the back of pro services. And there's 2 values they got out of it. One, they actually had someone else. It was a financing tact, right? So you got companies built on the back of pro services, so money came in. But it also was a form of product and customer development, because you then could say, like, okay, we figured out they care about this, and so we can actually factor out this thing, and this will be our product, okay? Like, and that was a thing that was actually very powerful back then. Like, not the financing part, in my view. It's about feeling what customers really needed and wanted out of that part of it. And that was so we came into this startup, and because we had that experience, we actually could talk about that as a group and use it as a tactic, right? So we were lucky to get a seed round early on, before we actually had product, and backed by the folks at Excel. And that was very, we were lucky to get that chance to do that. So we weren't looking at it like that attack from a financing perspective, but we loved that motion from a kind of product discovery perspective, and a customer discovery perspective, because we got at this because we said, hey, engineering leaders have a hard time doing their job because the engineers and business are deeply disconnected, right? This is a situation where this is the most strategic part of the company. It's 40% of OpEx, but the business does not understand it, and that leads to flailing and bad calls, right? And so our original vision was like, hey, let's do for engineering what Salesforce did for sales. And I think that's I know it's trite, and I know it's like a one-liner, but that was like our original framing to ourselves. So we knew the kind of macro problem space we wanted to build, but we actually took a default assumption, which is we do not know what the product needs to be. We literally didn't. We said, hey, we're a little bit older, we're a little out of touch, we probably don't know. The kids probably do it better than we do today. They probably got new ways to do it. And so to convince ourselves to do the startup, even before we actually had money or really got at it, we interviewed 50-something VPEs and CTOs. And that was easy for us in the sense that we had a strong network given our past of that, but also it was a proof point of an undersold market because we could get those interviews quickly, okay? And so we did this, and so along the way, we convinced ourselves this thing we wanted to do because people actually shared the pain that we saw and be like, no, there's no new answer. We have the pain too, it still holds. So great, we want to solve that pain. And so when we got going, we just called those same folks back and we said, hey, can we work with you on this stuff? Can we, we will do whatever you want. So this is our pro service angle. We will do your spreadsheets, we'll do your PowerPoints, we'll do whatever custom work you want, as long as we can have access to your digital systems. Okay? Whatever you want. And so that was our pro services framing. We didn't charge them for it. So that we can have dialogue. And so our assumption there was by doing this, whatever they ask us to do, they're going to actually want, right? And we're going to learn what the product needs to be to solve this problem. So we meet one guy, and they'd be like, oh, okay, I think I need this thing, or I need this deck, or I need this exercise, I need this analysis, and we do it for him or her. And then we take it and bring it to the next guy. I'd be like, hey, so if we did this, it looks kind of like this, would you find value in this? And they'd be like, yes, no, and that didn't work in this. And so we use this as our loop of how we actually built our first kind of 10 alpha partners or product discovery, whatever you want to do it, right? And for us, it was because of paranoia that we didn't want to build something that no one cared about. And we wanted to work with people so we could actually prove value. And it helped us figure out what size of company, like what's the pain point, what's the use case, like can we build a product to actually solve that? And we always had an idea of building a digital product along the way that was a platform that builds in here. So we had some kind of meta vision on this stuff, but we didn't know what the things were, so we had to do this, right? So when it came to, so if you're talking about kind of alpha partners, that's our first 10. But then when we actually talk about real dollar paying customers, sure, we turned around after time and started asking those folks, and like, would you pay for this? And so you learn pretty quickly, like they like that part of it. But the same motion happened. So then we started scaling that part of it up and like started talking to people that we didn't know at all or that weren't alpha partners and try to pitch it and frame it there and try to figure people would buy it there. And so we started, we hired a couple BDRs, bought a Zoom info database and started hitting it. And we had a sales advisor that helped us, kind of get that machine going and gave us repetitions to go ahead and talk to more folks and start pitching this. And that gave us the journey to our first kind of 20 customers on that path. And so of which probably the first 5 maybe were people we knew from kind of development from our early kind of customers. But the next 15 were just people we found on just raw prospecting.
Wow. I love that. I think one of the things I talked to a founder yesterday starting out, and they said to me, I'm doing discovery and I've talked to 3 customers, prospective customers. They said, "Do you think that's enough?" I said, "That's not even close to it." And when you say 50, right? I think it is that kind of volume. You need to be doing something of that type of 5, 3, 5. Like that's not gonna do it. They said, "You have a number?" I said, "I don't really have a number, but like if you ask me, it would be 30, 40, you know." And I think to your point, when you do that, I love that. I love that. And I also love the services thing. I'm on this kick of like the companies that come out of the services, the product companies that come out of the services kind of business or origins are at least the ones I'm involved in are so successful because there's no question of product market fit by the time the product is built. Otherwise, you wouldn't have built the product in the first place if you weren't doing the services. Those two are actually both of those. The 50 customers, and someone else had mentioned that to me on an earlier episode. But that services piece, I think I'm really happy you brought that up.
Yeah, and I'll say, look, I was talking to someone else about this too, and I think, and maybe it's relevant again. It was relevant in the '90s. Maybe we hit it again today, right? But I think there's one trap that I think people should actually watch for in that model. Okay, so this is why, as a founder, you are a product person too. Anybody's a founder is a product person because you're making the calls which way you go. You can't just do whatever they say. Okay, so in pro services, you're selling your time for dollars on this thing to make a thing. Okay, you need to still have a passive vision around where you're trying to go because they can take you left, they can take you right in places that may never be your product. So your job as a product manager is you're there to edit and decide whether you want to take on that contract, take on that engagement. And if you take on that contract and take on that engagement, whether you actually want to bring that to the platform or not, okay? Because the bad trap of this is you could just keep doing it, and all of a sudden you literally are a services company where there is no commonality around anything you do, of which it does not bundle into a product, of which you don't own the IP for this thing. Then you've just built a services company, which is not the goal here.
Right.
On that stuff. Right. So like it's a tactic, it's not the game,
Very interesting. Now, years later, you have 600 something customers, however number of customers you have. What is your current ideal customer profile?
Yeah, it's changed. I mean, we've been, we've always been working with software internet technology companies. That is kind of our core bailiwick. And I'll give you a funny story, part of the customer development stuff. So, one of our first concepts that I gave you the concept of services on, we learned because we met a VC around here, and he's like, I love my head of engineering. And I was like, I looked at him like, BS. No one does. No VC says that. All VCs like hate all their execs. This is not true, right? And so we found this person, and we said, well, what the hell did you do, right? And he said, well, I make this chart. I was like, this chart? And he's like, well, like I pull this data every week, and I calculate this stuff by hand, and I have this chart, and I show this chart around where we spend our time. And the board decided to get out of a line of business because of it. I was like, that's dope. That's a good chart. And so we take that to the next guy, and we're like, would you like this chart? He's like, yeah. I'm like, I'd like it if you make it automatically. Great, we'll make it automatically. So like that set us on a path. Now we went back though, and actually, so we learned from that early company that like, okay, this is what they did. They did it by hand. But along that journey, that company, which I don't think exists anymore, but that company ended up, like the original, we got the Genesis idea from, was not a good customer for us because they were only at the root of it like 10 engineers, right? And they were, they knew what everybody was doing, and they didn't really, despite the fact that we got the kernel of the idea from them, that was not our ideal customer. And so like we learned in that kind of customer exploration phase in the first couple of years that like, we generally do better as the companies get a little bit bigger, right? As they kind of introduce their layers of management and these things. And so, so today we generally are a company that still is very much selling to software companies, internet technology companies. We started like selling to companies that look like us, kind of A/B round companies, but like, and they're still part of the portfolio, but more and more we're living in the publics and the bigger companies that are that part of it. And we're now crossing over to other industries besides software and internet technology. So and those companies organize slightly differently. So we're learning about that. But as far as the who are, that's the firmographic ICP, right? So I guess you'd call it kind of mid-market. Software and technology is still our concentration, I think, in finance speak. But we're kind of going up market and into other industries. But I also think that who's the person that's our economic buyer? It's the head of engineering, CTO, CPO is often our economic buyer. We jokingly say it's the person that's bickering with the finance folks for next year's headcount. But like, because they're the person that actually is responsible for like, we're spending all this money, what are we doing? But they're also the ones that actually don't have a lot of legs in understanding how we connect to the finance team and the board to make decisions around this stuff. So that is our economic buyer, but our users go all the way down to, like the entire team, the organization, whether it's managers and product managers and project managers and all those folks there on that stuff too. But our ICP is really for now is the kind of head engineering, head of CTO, head of product kind of person from a persona perspective as our economic buyer, but we touch lots of folks in the organization accordingly. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So you mentioned Excel earlier as an early backer. So when you were starting the company, you had success. The previous company you were all part of was very successful. I'm not going to say you could have chosen any investor, but usually, you with that kind of pedigree, how did you go about choosing who you wanted to work with off the bat? Did you have someone at Excel you knew that talk to me about how that started?
So luck and privilege, right? Like, so the privilege is that you're right. We had some successes in our early career that let us make phone calls to people we wanted to talk to, right? So that's the privilege part of it, and recognize that part of it. The luck part of it is that we also walked into some ideas that they're already kind of around nearby, and so we could activate in that setting, right? And so like both of those come into play. To your point around, did we have the chance to pick? I don't know. Like I think fundraising is some luck, and I don't mean luck like we're not working. It's just like timing and things you walk into, and you have the connections and treated people right in the past. I actually think that we thought a lot about like, look, we're in the East Coast. We'd love to kind of find a brand out West. Was important to us because it helped open doors for us and new networks. And I think that is true and it mattered to us a lot just because it expands the sphere of your ability to reach, right? And the other part too is also like, knowing how, like, my co-founder Dave had a relationship with them and just knowing how they are as people and as firms, like in different situations, is really important to us, right? And so that trust, I think, is important. I actually was talking to a founder around this like Venn diagrams by map for early stage fundraising, and we talked about this early on, which is two circles. Okay, there are people that know and trust you and what you did. That is, they ascribe value to what you've done. It's a bidirectional trust, right? They respect the company you did before. They see you guys as good folks, and like, you know, you've done well by them. So like that's the personal trust part of the network, and it goes, oh, look at that, both directions, right? And then you've got this other sphere, which is people that know your domain very well. Okay, and so I'm going to say, like, let's talk about talking to either of these folks. So if you talk to folks that know and respect you, but they don't know the domain, so just in this circle, then they'll take your meeting, they'll hang out with you on this stuff, but it's going to take you, 6 months, a year to convince them there's a market there. They're like, I don't know, dev tools. Does anyone care about engineers? I don't know. There's no money there. What is that, right? Like, so that's someone that likes you, that respects you, but like somehow doesn't think that that's a big TAM. Okay, so that's like what. Then the other guy or gal who's like, hey, I know this domain cold. Okay, well, financing's global now, so this person that knows this dev tool sector cold, well, you haven't started yet, so you got no metrics, you got no success. They're like, who are you? They know every company in the world, and they know, like, well, these guys are kicking over here, they're doing great over here. What do you got? You're like, nothing. They're like, okay, I can't do a deal with you. You're like, I don't know who you are. And they know the sector better than you do, probably. Okay. Now, if you can line up that Venn diagram where the two match up, okay, that's when it clicks, right? Because you don't have to. They've got trust in you. They know that you're a person that they can trust, and you're in there like that has done it before. And I don't mean trust like maybe trust cannot. It doesn't have to be like they know you personally. They can be like they respect the company you came out of or the function you did on that thing. Like there's many forms of trust, but when you can get that magic Venn diagram overlap, and that's when things move quickly, and it clicks. And so I do think I think it's important to curate the way you look at things by those circles, right? And so when we started this, we said like, hey, we're not going to call like a ton of people. We're just calling a handful of folks that are kind of like in these orbits of things, and see if it works. Because when we originally started, we weren't entirely convinced we wanted to do this on a venture-backed basis. We were like, at first we were like, hey, should we do this on a bootstrap services basis? Like we didn't know. And so let's talk to a couple folks and see if this clicks in that way. And so we had a very small Venn diagram overlap. We didn't call a ton of folks on that accordingly. Anyways, I don't know if that's helpful, but
that's very helpful. That Venn diagram is really, I think you're right. I was actually on a panel with some VCs the other day talking about fundraising, and one of them was saying that a big challenge for them is meeting, because such a big bet in pre-seed, seed is on the founders, that if they don't know the founder, it's literally what you just said. They said it's really hard. And just a cold email from a founder, yeah, they may respond or whatever, but when it comes through some introduction, when they know the company, exactly what you said, that already starts, like, it just skips many, many steps to then have the conversation. But I like that other Venn diagram, which is if they have no thesis on the space or haven't done any work, it can take a long time. I mean, for them to get
I literally know two people that just didn't understand the space, and I think one of them even said, "Is there really money in dev tools?" And I literally remember that conversation. I was like, "Okay,
right.
Like this ain't gonna go fast, right?" Yeah.
When I was pitching Better Cloud, when we started, we were only about Google Apps or Google Workspace now, but Google Apps. And I pitched someone, I mean, I don't know if I ever told this story publicly. I pitched someone at Google Ventures, and the person in the meeting actually said to me, Google Apps? You mean like our Android apps? I said, no, like Gmail and Drive. And they said, does anyone use that? I said, I swear. And I was, but it's exactly this point of like, knowing, really understanding the having a thesis about the space is important, because how many bets are they really making every year? Not that many. They have to have conviction, on that. So, so that was the first investor, was Excel. When you think about going forward, how have you, as the company has scaled, have you thought about that differently, or is it kind of the same Venn diagram and you think about it the same
No,
way,
I think different stages have different things to add, right? I think that like it is not a static thing. I think every like and like it's more than capital. It's the brand, it's the network, it's the advice, it's the people, all these things. And the needs and compositions change over time. And also as you kind of get larger, you also need to think about the size of their pockets and will they play in future rounds and all of that stuff too. So like it's and again, like there's no one answer to this stuff, and the whole macro is changing so fast. But I do think it's not a one size fits all answer at all stages. I think different things, and geez, it's like different things work for different people. It depends on your ambition, it depends what you're trying to play for, it depends on what kind of value you're seeking, what you have strengths in already, what you already like. It is a per company, per founder, per round, per market, per state in the economy and evolution macro discussion. I don't think there's a one answer on this thing. Like, and I wish there's an answer, but actually, I'll change it up. It's actually better for everybody that there's not one answer, because I actually think this dynamicity breeds opportunity for all parties involved. It allows different companies to click with different investors, because different investors have different goals, right, at different sizes based on their fund size, what their thesis is, what the return model actually is. Like they are seeking different things. Not all investors are the same, not just by humans, but what they're trying to economically do, where they think they're going to bring value, where they think they're going to add edge on this stuff, right? And every founder and situation is different too. And so that actually allows, because geez, if both were static, that means you're only going to like fund 10 companies with 10 investors in the world, and that's it, right? But we all know there's many ways to make money and many ways to find successful partnerships here on this stuff. So I think it is. I'm not trying to duck the answer. I think there's no
no,
answer.
that's a good, that's good. So let me ask you, what is the biggest challenge you've ever faced at Jellyfish, and how did you overcome that challenge if you did?
Oh man, throw me on a hard question. I don't. I'm pausing, and I actually think like I'm skirting the answer here, maybe, but I don't. I think they're all hard. What I mean by that is like, or they're all difficult, because like I just think there's all kinds of wild cards coming at you all the time as a startup, and every time you touch it for the first time, it's hard, right? And maybe that's my naivety, or maybe that's my like learning new things as we go along. But I think the first time as a company you tackle things, it is hard, and I think it is.
Do you think it gets easier as you get bigger?
No, I think you face different challenges, and maybe like when you get these like grizzled, seasoned CEOs that do it better than I do, maybe they got it easy because they've seen it. They've seen all the diversity of things. But I don't know. I actually think it's because I'm not trying to say any of them are harder or not. It's just like they're all freaking hard at the moment, and then you're through it, and then you're on to the next, and that's also hard too because it's new and you didn't do it before. And I actually think it's not just about me; it's for the company. I think actually once the organization as an organism has done a thing once before, it gets easier for the next time, because it has a habit, it has a success or failure. Be like more like this last time or less like that last time, right? You can build on that, and you have the battle scars as a company, and as like, oh, that didn't work or that did work, or there's the positive reinforcement on that, and so it gets easier the next time. The first time you do something as an organization, it's really hard, and so I think everything new is always hard. And here's the thing about getting bigger. It just has new problems. It's not like it gets easier because, shoot, if anything was easy, we'd all already have it done. And if the answer was when you get bigger, it gets easier, well, then shoot, all you have to do is get to a B round and everything's easy, right? We're all going to crush afterwards. It's not. You know this. It's messy, right? It is hard. There are all new challenges that don't exist, right? I'll tell you for right now, for example, like, I said we talked earlier about needing to work on things that are going to play out 3 years from now, things that are going to play out now. Suddenly, we have to walk and chew gum and rub your stomach at the same time, or pat your head. Like you can't just do one answer at once. You need to, and you also have to attack multiple segments at once and multiple markets at once, different personas and use cases at once. You can't fail at any of them. You got to do all of them, right? So now the new challenge is how do we do all of those things at once, Because when you're early, you learn to do everyone go here and everyone go there and go crush it here, crush it there. Well, you got to do it all now, and that means and so that's challenges we've been able to grow through too, and that's an example of today. And I'm sure there's another one that I have no clue about tomorrow that I'm going to get walloped on. And so I have a hard time picking one because I think they're all hard along the way.
It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of talks to early stage founders, and one of the things that I tell people, I found this great quote. It essentially says, "The waves won't stop coming, but you can learn how to surf." And I think that that is when you just said that, like that's what goes through my mind because it's exactly that thing, which is the waves don't stop when you're small, large, third company. It doesn't actually, but when you face that situation, like you said, you can, when you do deal with that and you build that muscle memory as a founder or actually more so as a company, the next time that particular thing, you've learned how to surf that wave and you can get, but then you get walloped in your words exactly by the next massive wave and you're like, oh, okay, now I got to figure out how to actually surf that wave. So I think that statement is something that the reason I talk about it is because I think every founder needs to hear that because there are many people. I've had people tell me like I met them when they're at 0 of ARR, now they're 15 of ARR, and they literally, I walk in their office like, Dave, does it ever get easier? I'm like, no, it doesn't get easier. This is just it's a new set of challenges, but it doesn't get easier. Actually, you could argue the stakes get higher and
Yeah,
higher.
I was saying actually the pressure's on harder because the challenges have bigger issues come into play that affect more people.
Right,
If you get it
exactly.
wrong, right? I'll say though, like for the younger founders there, don't get suckered into the falsitude that the folks that have been through more are just going to be always better than you at it. Because I have watched some of these kind of really seasoned folks try to get back to scratch. And when they can't find that first product market fit or get those things too, it's hard for them too. It's all hard, man. It's just I'm just saying, don't fall in the trap that there are magic things that happen. It's just it's about, has your organism seen that experience in the time you are now and before, and can you crack it? And that is hard. Every one of them.
Right. Last question I have for you on Jellyfish, and then we'll transition to you personally on Jellyfish. Where is the company 3 years from today?
Oh man, I hope we're crushing it. No, I actually think it's look, I don't know if I can answer that because I think I can challenge any of us here. What does the economy and the tech scene look like? 3 years from today, and I think we're all full of stuff and we're making things up. I don't think we know. It is so hard to predict today what tomorrow brings on that stuff, and I think that is what the last few years have taught us. We don't know, right? But I can say, or actually, one other thing. I actually think it's also a really exciting, tumultuous time also in our technology space too. All the AI stuff is happening. It's happening everywhere and it's gonna change stuff, but yet it goes fast and slow. I think sometimes everyone's like, oh, the future's here, but then you're talking to folks in bigger companies, they're like, I don't even know. I've never even used an AI before, and you're like, okay. But then you've got folks in the valley that are living and breathing this thing, and there's this juxtaposition. And so, but I think we all intuitively know big things are going to change here. And so I don't think we all know exactly how they're going to land in that part of it. But I do think that's going to, I think change behooves startups, right? We have the ability to adapt to this environment. And that means that I am confident that we're going to adapt. I am confident the world's going to be different than it is today. I am bullish in our ability to actually go tackle that. So yeah, we'll be succeeding through that, but it's going to require adaptation, right? I can promise you that's what it looks like in the next 3 years, that we are all adapting. It's a time of vigorous change, right? In the way the world works, in the way that technology works and how we solve things. The pacing is going to be unclear. It's going to be fits and starts. But I am confident we're going to be adapting to that and growing with that. And I'm excited to get the chance. Because look, if you're an old line company, then yeah, that's a bad wave coming at you because you're trying to change what 100,000 people do. We don't have that challenge, right? And so we get to be here and see it happen and adapt ourselves on that stuff. In some ways, it's good that we're, not a mega company right now. Like, I'd actually be more worried if you're a mega company on that part because you can't adapt. Like, I still view us as early in the baseball game. Like, we're at inning 3 in this game here. And that means that there's going to be like lots of chances to swing and adapt on that part of it. So I don't know. I would say my best answer for you is going to be different. And I know we're going to be in there slugging for it and hopefully winning on it.
What let's go to you personally. So tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from originally?
Oh, gee. I am born and raised in Northern California. I'm an Oakland guy. I'm a little sad about the Oakland A's leaving. I was a baseball guy here. I live in Boston. No, actually, our office here in Boston. I live in Cambridge, which is like the Berkeley of the area here for my East Bay analogy on this stuff. Um, my background is I was a trained engineer, right? I came out to Boston for school. But further back from that, my parents are from Hong Kong. My dad was a civil engineer, and my mom was a programmer before programmers. So like my dad has been an entrepreneur, so I've got kind of some entrepreneurial bugs from him. My mom was a coder before coders. She was a math major who learned on punch cards, and and I learned my early programming stuff from her. So she's my technical inspiration on that part of it. And how I know this, like they don't let me code that much these days, but I use when I code, I use this thing called VI. So like in engineer speak, there's two code text editors. There's Emacs and VI. I'm a VI guy, and for those nerds out there, I am, like that's my side of the house, and I am a like the key combos I use. Someone watched me once and like, what are you doing? That's like a weird key combo. Like no one does that. And I learned that from my mom because she learned back before there were screens that there were these things called line editors where they're like you touch a keyboard and a printout would happen one line at a time on a printer. And so there was an editor back then, I think that was called Ed, and VI inherited all the commands from there. And so I learned the commands from her from that stuff. So I've got some like an old school lineage in the way that I do things.
Wow. And so are they from Hong Kong and they moved to Northern California
They came to the U.S. for college, and so like
together or they met?
they went to the same high school, but they came separately here. And but yeah, they ended up in the Bay. Both went to UC Berkeley, and there was a fair chance I was going to end up going to UC Berkeley, but like life happened, and I ended up out east.
What kind of businesses did your dad? What kind of entrepreneur?
He was a civil engineer, so he had a civil engineering business, and so he's done that in various reps. So not the software side of things, much more earnest and making sure buildings have the right foundations to get taller.
So do you think that growing up, did you know you wanted to actually start something at some point? Like, did you have that dream, or it was engineering, and that was the focus, and this kind of came later in life?
I wish I were that conscious about it. I can look at myself post facto. I would say, it was definitely not engineered, and I think about this a lot. Not to critique myself, I think about my kids on this stuff as they're coming up. Like looking back, I definitely did entrepreneurial things, like as much as high schools did. Like I had all kinds of weird hustles. Like I had, we had a mountain biking club that we sold donuts, and we we ran like swap meets around the Bay Area that we would actually collect, run a marketplace where we charge people like $50 to sell and $3 at the door to come in. And like, we do hustles like that. Like I ran a school newspaper, and learned kind of some selling from that stuff. Early memory for me was I did BDR work for a tennis club. And I would they'd give us these like printouts of that green and white paper that would show leads. It was like Glenn Glare and Glenn Ross. Did you get the good leads? And I would rip through this list and I would look for Chinese names. And then I would call those things and I would just start speaking Chinese. And that gave me a little bit of an edge because they'd stay on the call for like that much longer. And I think we got paid like $20 for everyone that we came in for for a tennis club week or something like that. Just stuff like that. So like I had that in my bones. Looking back, like weird shit like that. And then in college, I found a thing, which is I realized I learned that freshman summer, I did an internship at IBM and I was like, this is fun, but it was kind of big. And then I sought a internship at Microsoft, which was smaller then, but it was still big. And then this next summer after that, I was like, I really I like the smaller thing. And I actually, the summer of '99, I did a internship at the time public company, but it was only a 300 person company called Inktomy, which eventually became Yahoo Search. And I was like, wow, these are my people. This is fun, right? Like it was just like the code was cool, and I feel like I showed up and there was like a cot underneath the desk, and I was like, what is this, right? And there was like, and they'd have like Friday parties where like it was just like, I don't know. I was like, these are my people, um, and so it turns out post facto that my co-founder right now of Jellyfish, Dave Gorley, he also was the first engineer at Inktomy. So while I don't think we actually met during that summer, he already kind of was able to get to me through those circles. So I'd say like I was not deeply conscious at the time, but I sought things that were smaller because I liked the vibe of it. I think I liked exposure. I liked exposure to things that I didn't know, and I think in smaller places I got more exposure to stuff I didn't know. And again, this is all like me psychoanalyzing, retroactively looking at this. And so when I joined with Dave and Phil, this 8-person company, I was still in school. It was a half-time job. I was going to do my 5-year master's, but by spring I was like, this stuff is so much more fun than school is. And so I just tied off my undergrad, and then I went with those guys full time, and I bailed on my grad degree because I was like, I'm just learning a ton, right? So like I think I'm a guy who's always been seeking things that I have fun and are learning on, right? And I do more of that. It's like pretty simple algo on that.
Wow. Do you expose your kids to jellyfish?
Yeah, I mean, they've been to the office. They don't understand what we. I mean, it's really hard to explain what we do. Like I try to explain it to my mom, and she's like, "I don't understand." And I'm like, "Good point. This is not like back in the day. I used to do e-commerce search, and I think that was easier. You go to towerrecords.com, you search for something. You're like, this is what we do. They're like, ah, yes. This is very like to my kids. Like, so you make an app that helps people that like have people that build apps. This is all very circular. And so they're like, okay, I don't get it, but they come to the office and they see these things. I think it's I don't know, I definitely expose them to it, but I don't think they process it. Like, and they don't have to do this. Like, they should do what they love, right? But like, I think that's what I think I hope the kind of the Western ideal kind of gives them the chance to do. Like, they should do what they want to do, and not what I prescribe to them on that. But like but yeah, like we talk about it. It's just like a little whoosh right now. Right?
What drives you? What like deep down at your core, what is it that drive, like we've talked about, this is a hard job. It's a terrible job, really, in many ways. What is it that motivates you?
Yeah, like it's not. People always say like, is it fun on a given day? I don't know if it's fun on a given day. There are some hard days. I but I like the journey, man. I think I like the juice, right? Tactically, I probably like the juice. You can judge me for that. Like as much as I hate the stress, I probably love the stress. It's like it's health circular, right, on that. But I do think like I don't know, like what are we in it for? This actually goes back to my when I started this conversation with you. Like, what are we in it for? We wrote it down, and I think part of I think my co-founders and I share an experience. I think we want to make a dent in the world. I know that's cheesy and simple, but it's that. I'll give you one other cheesy story. I joined this company that got sold for over $1 billion, and I joined in college. Come on, lucky as can be. Come on, right? Like I got to come in as an engineer and got to leave as an executive. Got to open my eyes to this entrepreneurial world and got access. Built some career there and got to make some money too. Come on. Now people ask me all the time. That is lucky. They're like, "What are you most proud of that whole experience?" And it's not those things. Like the part that I'm most proud of is I got a chance to meet these folks. That I got to meet Dave and Phil. I got to be on that journey with these guys. Though that crew that we were part of, there's probably 20 companies, several of which are public, that came out of that crew in the diaspora in the decades since. I've got folks I work with that are big deal investment partners at West Coast firms. I've got people that we've worked with that are investors in us. I've got folks that we got to work with and hire and interview that are now running big deal, like tens of $billion companies. Like, that's what I'm freaking proud of. It's that maybe like our presence there doing that caused a little bit of nudge in a collective culture and the right vibe and some success in hubris that got everyone to get there. Come on, that's freaking awesome. So what am I in it for? I'm in it that I hope this crew a decade from now is off doing crazy effing shit that is bigger and better than I can think of, that's crazier that I can't even imagine today. And in order to do that, we do have to set the right tone, the right culture, and like get the right folks in the door and train them up. But also, we got to make this place successful. We got to make this place hum, because that's where they're going to learn. They're going to get some hubris from doing this. They're going to learn the right lessons here on this stuff. They're going to want to do it again. And the world's going to give them the door openers because of that, so they can take that at bat on that stuff. That's what I swing for. And all the while, that is, that it will hopefully bring folks money too, and all this stuff along the way, because it's part and parcel with that. But that's what I'm playing for.
I love it. What is one piece of advice, knowing everything you know today, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself back then when you were an intern, and starting, if you knew everything you knew today, what would that piece of advice be?
Just follow folks and gigs that you're learning and have fun with. It's the dead freaking simple. It is just learn from folks, follow them. If you like working with them, keep working with them. And if you're getting challenged and learning new things, then stick with it. If they're jerks, if they treat you badly, if you're not you're doing stuff that you're not excited about, don't do it. Like, it's dead simple. And that's where I'm cheesy. Like, I think the world works itself out around that.
If people want to connect with you, what's the best way? What's the best way to check out Jellyfish?
Yeah, so jellyfish.co is where we're at. You can find me on LinkedIn, AMLAU. You can find me on the X, AMLAU. I think these are easy. I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest to find me there. Or come on through the front door. That's all fine too.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you for doing this with me. I learned stuff here, and you put things in like some really concise ways I think people will take away from this. So thank you very much for doing this. I'm very happy Gail put us in touch, and thank you.
No, thank you, man. This is a lot of fun, and a lot of note trade you and I have together on this.
Awesome. Well, for everyone listening, hope you enjoyed. Please share this, like, subscribe, and we'll see you for the next episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.